Tonight, we dive into one of the Old West's most controversial stories. The popular account of this battle has become part of Old West lore, but in this case, the truth is perhaps more captivating than fiction. Tonight, join History at the OK Corral for the tragic, harrowing, and legendary story of the Second Battle of Adobe Walls. Northern Texas, June 27, 1874. In the middle of the night, in the tiny settlement known as Adobe Walls, James Hanrahan stands outside of the sod-roof saloon that he owns and operates. Hanrahan is alone, cloaked in the darkness of the night, and clutching a revolver. He is visibly nervous and exhausted from lack of sleep, and, more than anything, he wishes he could go inside, pour himself a stiff drink, and drift off to sleep until dawn brings on the repressive heat of yet another blazing Texas summer day. But he knows he cannot. Hanrahan knows what he must do. He aims the pistol into the air and squeezes the trigger. The tiny settlement, comprised of only 4 buildings, is soon suddenly awash in activity as the remaining 27 men present, who are mostly recent arrivals, tired after their long journeys, are snapped out of their long-awaited slumbers to the report of the pistol. The shot sails harmlessly skyward as Hanrahan hurries back into his saloon and tucks the weapon away. As the small crowd of inhabitants who are making Adobe Walls their temporary home gather outside, questioning what the source of the loud noise was, Hanrahan stumbles back out of his sod-roof establishment, breathlessly informing them that the noise has come from the cracking of a ridgepole that holds up the heavy roof of his building. This, if it is true, is a serious problem. This is a relatively common occurrence in the Old West, and the men know that a cracked ridgepole will have to be taken out and replaced immediately. As compensation for their efforts, the bartender offers up free drinks for all those pitching in to help. As the hours drag by and the men labor and drink, Hanrahan continually casts nervous glances at the door. He knows the ridgepole is not, in fact, cracked. But he knows that in the dimly lit building, in the middle of the night, it will be difficult for even experienced repairmen to spot a small crack in the sizable ridgepole. Hanrahan's intentions are not to oversee any actual repairs, but to simply keep the men encamped here at Adobe Walls awake. He has received reports in the preceding days from informants that he keeps in the territory of a large war party gathering nearby, and, not wanting to drive away business, he has chosen not to share the reports with anyone else present. Out here on the open plains of North Texas, reliable patronage is such a rarity that withholding news of an attack in order to ensure a steady flow of income is simply the cost of doing business. Aiding in Hanrahan's self-justification is the fact that his clientele are not exemplary of the typical American citizen at the time. Even amongst the rebellious and rowdy population of Texas, the regulars who indulge themselves in gambling and hard liquor at this establishment are rare in their capacity to endure danger and violence. His clientele, and the bulk of the not quite 30-strong population of Adobe Walls, is mostly comprised of buffalo hunters and skinners, otherwise known as hidemen. They are an unusually hardened and hardy lot, born from the boom in demand for buffalo hide. This boom has come after enterprising tanners on the East Coast developed a way to soften the hide that manufacturers found suitable and in many ways ideal for making everything from boots to coats to the leather straps used in the machinery now becoming ubiquitous in major urban centers with the advent of the Industrial Revolution. The buffalo hunters, who had once been employed by local army forts to harvest the mighty beasts for their meat to feed the troops, have, over the last several years, blossomed their grisly trade into its own industrialized operation. Their quarry, the imposing American bison, colloquially known as buffalo, present not only an enticing target, but an easy one for hunters familiar with their habits. the hulking animals cluster in large herds and do not flee until the lead animal among them is shot down. Over the course of the decades spanning from 1870 to 1880, the buffalo population of North America was utterly decimated. In 1870, there was thought to be more than 12 million buffalo roaming the plains. By 1880, there will be fewer than 400,000. After the animals are killed, the teams of men set about the tedious, tiresome, and outright filthy task of skinning the massive animals and then salting and harvesting the animals' tongues, which are prized delicacies in the cities on the eastern seaboard and in Europe. The carcasses are then left to rot by the thousands on the open expanses of the sun-soaked plains. This practice had increased in both pace and scope, beginning in the territory of Kansas and rapidly expanding southward and westward into the territory belonging to tribes like the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho. By this point in the mid-1870s, these once powerful tribes that have forfeited large swaths of their territory to the United States government are finding themselves in increasingly dire straits. As their territorial domain recedes, and the once expansive herds of buffalo are reduced exponentially year after year, the tribes of the central and southern plains are becoming increasingly angry and increasingly desperate. Their ire is drawn, in particular, by the teams of buffalo hunters who roam their lands and cut down the animals that they depend on almost entirely for their survival. In this area of northern Texas, the Comanche have been hit particularly hard. Though they are still the most powerful tribe on the southern plains, their numbers have been decimated by outbreaks of dysentery, smallpox, and cholera over the preceding few decades. Though once a mighty Spartan-like culture, nearly devoid of formalized religious practices, they have recently begun to adopt an odd and rather ad hoc adaptation of the sun dance, a ritual performed by tribes with more developed religious practices like the Kiowa and the Cheyenne. They have spent much of the past few years being perpetually pursued by the U.S. Army and intermittently wreaking havoc on Texan and Mexican settlements as they struggled to regain from the ravages of the white man's diseases. Though they are still feared throughout the whole of Texas, the Comanche people know that they are, as a whole, ailing. Thus, many among them have sought solace in medicine men, who claim to have spiritual solutions to the Comanche's temporal problems. Foremost among them is a 23-year-old, heavy-set, and broad-faced man named Isatai. Though he is not a warrior, nor does he have any experience at all in tactics or strategy or logistics, he has managed to convince the struggling and weary Comanche people that he is in possession of a great power. Throughout the spring of 1874, he had begun to foster his own legend. Comanche camps from all over the southern plains began to buzz with tales of this powerful young medicine man who, it was said, could stop bullets by casting spells, could actually fly into the sun to spend time with the spirits of the other world, and who could belch up literal wagon loads full of bullets to supply the Comanche in their fight against the whites. Now was the time, Isatai had insisted as he traveled from camp to camp, for the Comanche to rise up, to join with their allies in the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho, and to finally, once and for all, drive the American invaders from their lands. Though many amongst the Comanche would likely have dismissed the young Isatai out of hand were he traveling alone, it is his close friend, the legendary warrior Quana Parker, whose endorsement lends great credence to his claims. Quana, the half-white son of captured Texan Cynthia Ann Parker and the Comanche chief Pettinacona, had risen to prominence as a respected warrior and a leader after being effectively orphaned when his father had been killed and his mother recaptured by the Texans in a raid a decade prior. Now, his opinions hold great sway amongst his people. In May of 1874, when the Comanche bands all gathered on the Red River for their attempt at a sun dance, Quana and Isatai beseeched their ailing people to listen to their cries for an uprising and to follow them into the fight. Isatai had promised to make the warriors invincible and render the Texans they planned to attack completely helpless with his powerful magic. They had managed to recruit warriors from their allies in the Kiowa and the Cheyenne and the Arapaho, and now, after much speech-giving and testimony, they convinced many of their fellow Comanche to come on the warpath. Estimates place the size of their total force at between 250 and 1,000 warriors, with most experts erring towards the lower end of those numbers. In either case, with their band of warriors now in tow, Isatai and Quana had the force that they had long dreamed of. They consulted with chiefs from all of the tribes, and it was a near universal conclusion amongst them that the biggest single problem facing the tribes of the Southern Plains at the moment was that of the buffalo hunters. Their incessant slaughter of the lifeblood of the tribes must be stopped at any cost. And so, the war party, after much secretive preparation, now makes their way towards Adobe Walls, the headquarters of the buffalo trade in North Texas. Meanwhile, as the intertribal force of warriors make their final preparations for battle and then ride out towards Adobe Walls from across the plains, the buffalo hunters inside Hanrahan's sod-roof saloon are just finishing their laborious task of replacing the supposedly cracked ridgepole of the ramshackle building. They have been thoroughly plied with whiskey for their efforts, and many among them are ready to return to their bedrolls for some much-needed sleep. But Hanrahan, ever watchful of the eastern horizon as he awaits the sunrise, insists that they continue to stay and drink, free of charge, as a means of thanking them for their assistance. He intends to keep them awake until the impending attack finally comes, and hopes that their senses are not too dulled by alcohol to fight off their attackers. Finally, at around 4 a.m., the party of Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, led by Isatai and Quana, arrive atop the ridgeline overlooking Adobe Walls. Isatai is completely naked and painted head to toe in yellow, the color of invincibility. Many of the warriors, as well as their horses, are also completely covered in yellow paint. 10 years earlier, in 1864, the legendary mountain man Kit Carson had led a U.S. Army contingent in search of Comanche raiders in a battle that had occurred in the Adobe ruins that gave the place its name, which lie about a mile away from where the buffalo hunters now make their homes. Carson and his men had seen a sight eerily similar to this, and it was only through Carson's inexorable leadership and coolness under fire that he and his men were able to survive. But the buffalo hunters here on this day in 1874 not only lack discipline and leadership, they are also largely half-drunk on rot-gut whiskey, and most have been kept up all night performing hard physical labor. They are, in short, in less than ideal condition to fight a pitched battle against a highly experienced and incredibly motivated attacking force. However, these hunters do have one thing that their countrymen serving in the U.S. Army a decade earlier did not: the Sharps buffalo rifle. The imposing firepower possessed by the weapon, combined with the experience and combative nature of the buffalo hunters, will now prove to be their only hope of survival in the fight to come. As the morning sun begins to crest the eastern horizon, the imposing force of native warriors, with the exception of Isatai and a few select elders, charges down the hill, sweeping down upon the small settlement with startling skill, speed, and ferocity. William Dixon, better known as Billy Dixon, a 23-year-old buffalo hunter who had come to Adobe Walls from Leavenworth, Kansas, by way of West Virginia, gives the following account of the initial morning charge. There was never a more splendidly barbaric sight. In after years, I was glad that I had seen it. Hundreds of warriors, the flower of the fighting men of the southwestern plains tribes, mounted upon their finest horses, armed with guns and lances and carrying heavy shields of thick buffalo hide, were coming like the wind. Over all was splashed the rich colors of red, vermilion, and ochre, on the bodies of the men and on the bodies of the running horses. Scalps dangled from their bridles, gorgeous war bonnets fluttered their plumes, bright feathers dangled from the tails and manes of the horses, and the bronzed, half-naked bodies of the riders glittered with ornaments of silver and brass. Behind this headlong charge stretched the plains, on whose horizon the rising sun was lifting its morning fires. The warriors seemed to emerge from this glowing background. The cry goes up amongst the buffalo hunters that an attack is fast approaching, and all those who are awake race to grab their weapons and barricade themselves inside of the adobe walled buildings. The walls are 2 feet thick, providing ample cover even from native rifle fire. However, outnumbered by at least 20 to 1, the buffalo hunters are well aware of their current predicament. They are also well aware of the vitriol the plains tribes carry for them, and they know that the only thing worse than being killed would be to be captured alive by the Comanche and their allies. The tales of the unthinkable tortures wrought upon prisoners of war had circulated on the frontier for decades, and now those stories helped to steel the resolve of the buffalo hunters. But the attack happens in a flash, leaving 2 buffalo hunters, the Shadler brothers, who had been asleep in one of the covered wagons, stranded away from the cover of the adobe structures. They are quickly cut down, their pitiable cries drowned out in the din of gunfire and war cries. Their beloved dog, a large, sweet-natured Newfoundland, is also shot down in his efforts to defend his masters. All 3 are scalped. The attack roars on, and in a matter of moments it is within range of the adobe buildings. Another resident of Adobe Walls, a man named Billy Tyler, is shot through the lungs as he attempts to rush into one of the buildings in a futile dash for safety. The fight continues on, with the attacking tribesmen whirling in a cyclone of violence around the defenders who are now ensconced in the buildings, as they desperately fire out of the portholes cut into the walls. Quana Parker, in the lead of the furious attack, attempts to batter down the door of Hanrahan's saloon by backing his horse up to the door and attempting to use the animal's powerful legs to kick it down. After a number of earnest attempts, though, the young warrior and fearless leader is forced to abandon his ploy in the midst of gunfire pouring out from the buffalo hunters inside. Now, the warriors attempt to set fire to the buildings, but the adobe walls and sod roofs make poor fuel for the flames, and the attackers are unable to accomplish much in the way of consequential damage. Finally, after suffering heavy initial losses at the hands of the buffalo hunters and their powerful rifles, a fate that they had been assured was impossible by the medicine man Isatai, the attacking native forces pulled back to regroup on the northern ridge. For the rest of the day, intermittent attacks rained down upon the besieged defenders. But time and again, the warriors are repelled, much to their confusion and consternation. Then, the attacks drag on into a second day. In between defending against charges, the defenders do their best to bury not only their dead, but veritable heaps of their own horses and oxen that the native warriors have killed in frustration when they are unable to breach the defenses of their human targets. However, more hope for the buffalo hunters comes in the way of reinforcements, when 2 more hunters come into the camp from the surrounding area. One of these men is sent out to ride to Dodge City for reinforcements, leaving the total number of the defending force at 30. Still, despite their disadvantages in mobility, numbers, and position, the buffalo hunters are able to stop the native forces from overrunning them. The attack continues on for a 3rd day, and a number of frustrated warriors, along with Isatai, congregate on a hill that later estimates gauge to be between 1,000 to 1,500 yards away from Hanrahan's saloon. The warriors and the medicine men sit atop their horses, presumably well outside of rifle range even for the powerful buffalo guns, and quarrel over what to do next, and over who is to blame for their difficulties so far. Isatai, doing his best to defend himself against his comrades' accusations of fraud and cowardice, claims that the Cheyenne had killed and eaten a skunk on the eve of their attack, effectively nullifying Isatai's medicine. As the group of tribesmen squabbles amongst themselves, Billy Dixon, the 23-year-old hunter who, despite his youth, has already built a considerable reputation for himself as a crack shot, eyes them from nearly a mile away while standing in the doorway of Hanrahan's saloon. After a few moments of sizing up the distance and condition, Dixon takes up his rifle and braces himself against the door jamb. "I was admittedly a good marksman," Dixon would later recall, yet this was a shot that one might call a scratch shot, meaning that, essentially, he simply aims as best he can and hopes for the most effective shot possible. Seconds after Dixon squeezes the trigger of his Sharps rifle, one of the native horsemen in the group berating Isatai suddenly slumps over and falls to the ground lifeless. Dixon's shot has, miraculously, struck one of the warriors from a distance thought by nearly everyone, including Dixon himself, to be impossible. The group on the hill scatters instantaneously, having incurred yet another fatality, and now with their nerves irreparably shaken. Still, throughout the day, more attacks are made, with Quana Parker marveling many of the buffalo hunters with his strength and martial prowess, as he fearlessly charges again and again, and even manages to lift a wounded comrade off the ground with one hand while sitting atop his horse. Finally, Quana's horse is shot out from under him at a distance of nearly 500 yards. He takes cover behind a hulking, rotting buffalo carcass, only to receive a bullet wound of his own between his neck and right shoulder blade. Ultimately, he is able to escape to safety, and while his wound will prove to be largely superficial, the damage that has been incurred by his forces is rapidly becoming unmanageable. The once prophetic Isatai now has no answers, and as dissension grows amongst the ranks of the Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, more buffalo hunters from the surrounding area pour into Adobe Walls to assist their buffalo hunter brethren. Several of the more experienced, older chiefs berate Isatai for causing such losses, beating him about the head and torso with their riding quirts. Though he can provide no solutions and still refuses to ride forth and fight the hunters himself, Isatai maintains his innocence. Soon, though, the native forces are rife with division and discouragement, and on the fourth day, they disappear into the expanse of the plains. After fighting for their lives for the better part of a week, the defenders holed up inside the buildings at Adobe Walls are elated. By August of that year, more than a month after the battle, a troop of cavalry arrived to Adobe Walls to find a dozen buffalo hunters still resolutely surviving in the remote outpost. Outside the saloon, each impaled on a post, are the skulls of several vanquished warriors. But the Americans' fight for expansion, and the tribes' fight for survival, will not end here. Though Isatai will go on to be held in great contempt by his people, Quana Parker will become a seminal figure in the tribe's history, and a pivotal force in leading the Comanche forward in their new way of life into the 20th century. Billy Dixon, the hunter who made the nearly impossible shot at Adobe Walls, will go on to be awarded the Medal of Honor as a civilian for his actions in a fight against the Comanche and Kiowa only months after this battle at Adobe Walls. Also present at the fight is a young 20-year-old hunter and skinner named Bat Masterson, who will go on to become one of the Old West's most legendary figures, serving with the likes of Wyatt Earp, and even going on to work as a newspaper correspondent in his later years. The Second Battle of Adobe Walls will shape the lives of virtually all those who fought there and managed to, somehow, survive. It was also a pivotal moment in the history of the Old West, as it will, unofficially, mark the beginning of the end for the way of life of the tribes living on the plains. Never again would the buffalo range in such numbers, and never again would tribes like the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho roam with such freedom. The tribes present at Adobe Walls will all go on to carry out retributive raids on homesteads and farms from Mexico to Colorado, though never again would they hold martial superiority over their homelands. But the accounts of those many raids, as well as the many tales of the remarkable lives of figures such as Quana Parker, Billy Dixon, and Bat Masterson, are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. If you like this story, be sure to click on one of the videos on your screen now to watch more. Also, if you'd like to learn more about Old West history, be sure to sign up for the HOKC newsletter. Link is in the description below. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.